Welcome back. In this lesson, we'll bring everything together and I'll go over methods of optimizing your scene so that we're within our polygon budget. Remember, we set that at 100,000 polygons at the beginning of the lesson. And so now that we have everything in, it's a good time to just check and see where we're at. And I've modeled everything fairly conservatively, so we should be pretty closely in range. Worth mentioning is, I've got my scene organized, I've gone through and renamed quite a bit of things, and it's just easier for me to work once I know, what layer objects are on, or once I have objects on their specific layer and named properly. It's just easier to dig through the scene and edit things. What I do have here is the high detail tires, or at least a version thereof. And so I went ahead and put those in my scene. And this is purely personal preference. Like I mentioned, eventually you'd bake maps out from this, whatever kind of tire you have designed. But I have them in my scene here because depending on what I'm doing, if I'm just needing like a quick render with some details, I'll just go through and hide my game ready version. And then I could render with my high detail version if I haven't gotten to my texturing and all that as yet. And that's just something I do to get previews or anything like that. With that said, I'll go ahead and hide those again. And so now we're needing to just check our poly count and see where we're at. And so for that, you just go to your configure, statistics, setup. We'll have polygon count checked, total checked, and I'll do selection, or total plus selection, and I'll do triangle count, vert count, along with poly count. I'll okay that. And so now, when I hit 7, it's telling me total polys in my scene. If I select everything, it's telling me my poly count plus total polys. And if I went in, got my high detail tires in, selected everything again, you'd see it's telling me the total. So when it gives you the total, it's telling you for objects that aren't present as well. Selection is telling me everything I've got selected. Alrighty, so with that being said, I'll just go back and hide my high detail version. And you'd be thinking, well, we've made the poly count, but of course we don't have the level of fidelity that we're needing here for the kind of project that we were working on. So what we'll do is I'll go ahead and subdivide my model, because this is just my, final model object with a turbo smooth on it, but nothing for the subdivision. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and turn the iteration to 1. You can see that our poly count jumped up already. And I'd go in, and for the wheel, I'd add a turbo smooth with an iteration of 1. And so I just go through and do that for the objects in my scene. I wouldn't do that to my game ready version of my tire, because remember, we're going to bake the details from the high poly version here. So that would be fine. So now that we've got this going on, I'd go ahead again and select everything. And now you can see that we're at 125,000 plus polygons, which is over our 100,000 polygon budget. And so this is where the fun begins, where you start digging in and optimizing things. For example, I'll just go in, let me hide the headlight glass there. And I'll select my light bulb, and I'll check that out. And we had modeled that fairly detailed, so I know that I wouldn't need a turbo smooth on that. Light fixtures, those we wouldn't need anything on either. And so what I'll do is just move around the model and check the polygon density and see what's happening. And so right away what I do is I'd optimize the wheel, and we could start on that. And I just isolate my selection. And now what I'm needing to do is just check with my turbo smooth, see exactly what's going on. And since we're at the final phase of our project, I can just go ahead and collapse with my turbo smooth, subdivision set to 1. And so this is what we'd have. 11,000 polygons, of course, this is way more than we're needing. So now we'd go through and start removing faces. The other thing to be mindful of, and I'll undo my collapse, is when you're working with Turbo Smooth, sometimes you can check ISO line display here, and that just decreases the mesh density for preview purposes. If you go ahead and collapse with that still checked, you'll get some weird anomalies in your mesh. And it might not be doing it here, but typically, yeah, oh, there we go. So you'll just get some weird stuff going on. So something to be wary of is to make sure you don't have that checked at this stage when you're collapsing. All right, that being said, now we just go in, look at our model, and see where we have edges that we probably won't need. I've got to make sure I'm in editable poly. So it's just a matter now of going in, removing edges that aren't really giving us anything, don't affect the contour of the object per se, but they're just there because we subdivided everything. So here, just grab those, remove them. You could even delete faces in here if you needed to, but I'll just leave that for now. I'll just go in, check this area here, select an edge, hit Z to zoom extent, and I can see that I've got an edge there, an edge here. This is just in the middle on a flat surface. I can just loop that selection, zoom extents, and what I can do is turn off my edge display with F4 so I can see what's going on, and then control backspace to remove. I didn't see any major changes or anything happen with the smoothing on the object. So I know that removing that edge gained me some polygons to spare. Similar thing with here. Zoom in. And that's fine. If you wanted to, you could go ahead and nuke those edges there. So I'd come in under here, nuke those edges. And so as you can see, for your smoothing to hold up and for things to still look pretty good, you've got to have just a certain number of edges here. The main edges, center edge, and an edge to protect. So it's usually about 4 edges or so. And so I'd go in, oops, and remove those edges there. And so by doing that, you'll trim the objects down, and that'll bring your poly count way down on the objects that you're editing. The other thing I'll do is you'd repeat this process, all over the wheel and any other object that you have a turbo smooth modifier on that's subdivided and you wanna bump the polygon count down. The other thing I'll go over is we do that on the body of the car as well. So I'll just hide unselected for right now. And for example, I've got just a solid polygon here to block out the wheel well area. I'll go ahead and hide that. And so now what we could do in here is with these edges here, depending on how many subdivisions you have, you could go through and start collapsing these edges here. And once you've done that, it's just a matter of grabbing edges, removing those. And so what we did was we're creating triangles in certain areas. And it's basically where you won't be seeing things. And that's just to decrease the poly count in our model and get us within our poly budget. Another thing worth noting is, I'll go ahead and hide this blocker here as well. Another thing worth noting is some areas on your model, depending on how you modeled it initially, if you had any sort of edges that you moved, when you applied the shell modifier for subdivision and thickness, you'll get little areas where extra polygons are created. This is a prime example because we had the fold here. So it's just a matter of going in, finding those, and just deleting them. As you see fit. I'll check up on the top of the car as well, because it's just any area where you have geometry that was folded over or modeled in a certain way, then the shell is going to duplicate the geometry there. Finally, other thing I'd go and check for is just edges that are sitting on your symmetry line. And typically, if your symmetry is perfect, then these will get canceled out because the verts here are going to be welded when you add the symmetry modifier. But sometimes you might get some weird pinching or something going on in here. So it's good practice to just come in, grab those faces, and delete them. And so you repeat this over your model until you've gotten all those edges removed. And your polygon count down. You can see that we dropped that somewhat already. That concludes this lesson. Thank you. I look forward to seeing you in the next.